Alright, so I've been posting it around this idea I've had for these building stages where we can all sort of build different designs and show our styles. So I've done a few of these stages and I've done them like the Story Island, so Furrowfield, khrumbul-dun, and Moonbrook. And so today we're just going to go through how I did them. I'm not going to do a full commentary for the 40 minutes, just I'll go in and out. And you'll have a little bit of a look at the builder's hut that I'm using. And if you go in now, there's a lot more stuff in there, like paint buckets and a lot more decorations and things like that. And I really encourage you to just do whatever you want with the stage, knock down the house, or use it to make your own style. So I figured for these Story Island builds, it would be a good way to show the different materials we can use and the different styles that you can practice to sort of build on what you're going to be doing the most often. Because you'll find you'll develop a style, a certain roof or a certain tile that you use a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. Having like a strong influence and style is how we all sort of start off. And because this is a stage, it's a little bit different to building, say, a full barn, but the fundamentals are still there. So even though you're not building, say, the back half of something, because a lot of the time you're just duplicating the back half of something from the front half, not always, but a lot of the time, you don't need to build a full building to practice. This is the thing I love about a stage. So because we're not actually building inside the barn, we can practice decorating at another time. We can just go around the facade of this if we want. We don't even have to change the tiles. We can just make it one bigger. And because this is a barn, we're going to do it one bigger because it's, you know, say bigger than the barn. And the castle at the end will take up even more space. And back here, I've got a lot more materials now. I won't ever have like a full exhaustive list of everything, but I am trying to just sort of group everything in ways that make sense to me and sort of might help you. So I decided that I hadn't tried before, but because these wooden gates stack, I wanted to see if I could do like a really large grated door with them. Obviously when someone's going through, they're only going to be using the gate on the floor, but it'll give a nice effect. I think I do test a little bit later to see if you can get in, which you can, even though the gate's sort of blocking above you. So it would look a little weird when people were using it because only one part of the door would open, but a lot of barn doors do work like that, so it's not totally out of the ordinary. And I decided, because those barn doors are partially see-through, that I would make it so you could see back in to the inside, because it just gives a little bit more depth to the sort of stage that we're setting. And a good way with setting a stage is if whatever's inside is quite dark, makes it look like it isn't necessarily such a close block. It makes it look like maybe it's just fading into the distance, into the light. So the whole idea of this builder's hut at the back is so that you can rest at night and grab your materials. And if you spend a while like I just did sort of playing around with different styles, you can always just skip the night and have the daylight. And behind your bed is weather cards as well if you're trying to get a specific effect. I didn't end up using snow in the end in the Moonbrook one. You can use that too. And so I don't necessarily need to fill in the sides for when I'm doing something that's just a stage that I am taking a picture of from the front, but both because it adds a little bit of depth if you're doing anything that's going to come off the sides, like say corners of a roof, and also because we're doing a bit of practicing building here, so we want it to look semi-neat on most sides. And so we'll speed up the build pretty soon. I've kind of done it in almost the way you go through the story, so it's going to be a little bit slower here while we're at the start of the furrow field build, and then by the end we're just sort of fast forwarding through for a lot of it. And so I do actually like this. You do have to open both the gates, so I don't think NPCs would go in, but if this was an actual barn, you could still have that as the main door and just have a side door that's just like one regular door, and they'll still use that. And like I said, so we'll skip through a bit more of this stuff in the later builds, but it's important to just test different things. I wanted bunting on the top, but then I realized because we have the ropey logs there, it was a little bit too noisy. The bunting was getting lost within that ropey texture. So there's no point in, when we want something to look nice and interesting, putting all the detail in one section. We want to try and make it interesting in different areas in different ways. And so setting a stage is, obviously it's about it looking good at the final product with the photo, but a big part of that is setting it up so that it is functional. Like, it doesn't actually have to work, but you have to be designing it as if it was a functional object. So when I'm designing this barn, I mean design it to be functional, not as an actual room type within the game when you're staging something, but functional in terms of what that actual thing would be. So for a barn, we want to think about putting in the elements that would actually make sense, like an awning at the front of the main door. And so obviously you can always get your sifter to get your corner pieces, but if you only need one or two, it's just as easy to make just a little block square of 4 if you don't have your sifter, or if you couldn't be bothered, just to make a little awning like that. And so to change this roof from a sort of front gable to a wraparound, all we're going to do is sort of turn that roof structure we've got there into a pyramid. And so as long as it's going in by one, we can then just start going around and filling it with the roof. But we do want to put a lip. It's always nice. It very rarely looks great when you don't have a lip, unless that's what you're trying to do, especially when you're starting. It's a good idea to just do lipped roofs because you've got a bit of shadow, a little bit more interesting style, and it's just automatically going to make things look a bit better at first. And you can start trying to do more complex roofs, like non-lip roofs, later. I only say more complex because usually you need to add other elements to make it look like it's supposed to be like that. And as well, always remember, use your snapshot camera if you need to get a better view of what you're doing, not just in this kind of setting up a scene scenario, but even just to zoom out when you're building. Now, I like these pop-up wraparound roofs, especially for barns and natural builds, when you can use the netting and the ropey logs. They look really nice, and I've done this in a few other barns, putting just a layer of haystacks in there. You can't see it as well maybe in the photo, but in a barn build, it's really nice. You don't need to be able to access that floor, but it makes it look like there's, like a storage area in there. And the other great thing about the pop-ups is it stops the roof becoming really tall and pointy and overwhelming the building. Then you have 2 layers of 2, or like a 3 and a 1. You can sort of differentiate usually between 3 and 1. And It can look like a pagoda if you use sort of more bold black and white styles, but for a natural build, it just looks like a tiered barn. And just as a really simple cap, we can use the logs. There's a few different things you could do, but the logs are always handy because, you know, it makes sense for the rest of the barn. And so now that it's night, we can really get that nice furrow-field effect from the jack-o'-lanterns as well. And even though we won't see them as brightly in the day, it helps me feel a little bit inspired. So it wasn't hard to sort of figure out we'd put crops somewhere here. The bigger question in terms of setting this up as a stage, which is probably a little bit different than actually building something, is how to get everything kind of in view. So I had a few things raised at the back and made sure the taller things were at the back. And that's, again, like any time that I mention little things for staging, although I'm talking about the specific stage that I am working on, those elements are still valid for your town building. So for example, if you want to build crops that look really nice to look at, then you kind of need to think of the direction that you assume people will be coming from as the audience to the stage. So if you're coming out of the teleporter, for example, and you want the feature thing to be, you know, these big, beautiful fields, then you need to spend the majority of your time building from the front in that way. Not building, but decorating, building from the front. So knowing that when someone walks in, they're going to maybe see lots of tall crops. So putting, for example, like the tomatoes in the back there, trying to plan to have those crops up high. It's not something you have to do, it's just if you're wanting to build and plan in a way that is, you know, inviting for people and not just for fun for yourself, then that's the kind of little tricks that you can think of. So even, again, if this was not a stage but a real barn, I would still want to be setting up, if I was having tables around the barn like I do in Cerulean Steppe, I would still want to be setting it up at the front, if that's how you would usually be approaching the barn. Obviously you could approach from anyway, but if I'm assuming that someone's coming from the front of my town, I'm going to want it here. At my Cerulean Steppe, however, when you approach the barn, you approach from the side, to actually set up most of the decorative area behind the barn so that you can see it as you came in. And so that is it for the Furrowfield one, and now we'll move on to khrumbul-dun. So just to start off, to get me inspired and feeling that khrumbul-dun theme, I figured it was a pretty easy guess to say that it would be sand that we'd be working on. I was considering actually kind of making it look like the inside of a mine. That was definitely possible, but it was just going to take a lot more time, and it's something I actually do want to do in the future. I was thinking you could do like a cutout of the side of the mine and all the guys sort of working in it. But then you're going to have to build up sort of a big, large curve over 20 blocks. So that would be fun, but not right now. So instead, we're going to do the post day, I guess you would call, activity in khrumbul-dun, which is drinking. So we're going to make a bar. And I thought for this one, we'll keep a little bit more of that original shape of where the window was, but instead we'll have it as where the bar will be. So I made sure it was 4 wide so that it would fit the bar, and at first I was going to have it directly in that hole, but I thought, you know, we want to give it a little bit more depth, so I had it a few blocks out, and then we've just added a couple of blocks around it that I know later will fancy up the sides of them. And so again, because it is a tableau, a scene, we want to make sure that the inside looks like it is deep and functional. So we want to make sure that we swap those blocks over in the back to be the same blocks that are going to be for the rest of the build. And I love using Adobe anyway, so I was excited to do this one for Bab's build, but I really recommend playing around with those infinite Adobe blocks. They are really fun. The only thing is, like you'll see here, is if you're just using the infinite pieces and not using your sifter, you end up sort of getting mixed around sometimes. So this is one where often you will need your sifter or at least your ulti-mallet to break pieces up and put them back together a little bit easier. I love these Adobe windows as well. So we're going to make sure to put those around, and the great thing is when you put light behind them, they sort of bring out a nice interesting shadow and a pattern. And so I've put the dyed white hanging drapery above the gate. So obviously that door isn't actually counting as a door, but I think it is really great decoration, and I recommend using that door dyed more just as like a window kind of piece. Remember that it will sometimes create issues if you're using it to block sections off, because it is going to be creating a room. But it's nice on higher levels to sort of look like a window effect. And so with this one as well, I decided we'd do that front gabled roof. So pretty much we just want to do a pyramid effect, one up, one back, one up, one back, and then roof on it. You'll see that after 4 tiles or so, it starts looking a bit plain, but that is all right. There is a lot of ways to play around with that. Chipping out little bits like I did there and adding something like a sign or a chimney or some kind of roof decoration helps break it up. The other thing obviously are just these windows, and first I do try and put some windows above the door over here as well, but that starts to look a bit too samey for me, so I turn it into a platform, and that's how it becomes Babs Bar. Plus using, using different elevations of your roof can be a handy way to make it look more varied as well. And so the decorating element here really was just asking myself, what are the things that make khrumbul-dun khrumbul-dun? And the answer is Babs. The answer is beer. The answer is fun, apart from the mining side. So on the right, I decided to go with that fun theme, and we've got the little mini oasis, and we're obviously just going to grab things from that biome. And things that we get from the story mode, like the umbrella and the lounge chairs, and I put a few of the weights there as well, so they can sort of show off while Babs is relaxing by the pool. And then, so for the beer element on the right hand side, I've got that nice sort of fire feature table. And then of course we want to keep that whole mining element tied in, so over in that back right I've got an iron platform with a bunch of crates and things, and then we're going to go through in a minute and we're going to pop some sort of raw ore next to it as well. And then obviously as well, popping around things like the mining tools are going to give it that feeling, and the potted gladiola is sort of a reference to Bab's blueprint room. And so, because it's a tableau, I could get away with having the shifting sands in front of the bar, but realistically, if you were actually doing this in a build, it'd be quite annoying because that floor would keep getting destroyed. But the little bits of extra effect, like the wispy grass and stuff, that is something you can definitely add to this type of build. And so, like the Furrowfield one, because it isn't a full seam, we can put the door just in front of a wall, but this is also a fine way to make a building more interesting. If you plan it like that, then obviously you can just go back and knock away the blocks behind the door, and you've got a nice little outset. And as well, another thing you can do here, like I said, is put something like banners on a big door like that, and they won't stop people from being able to go in, and they look quite nice. You just need to build some blocks up behind it first and then carefully get rid of them and replace the door. So I haven't done many castles, so I'm not great at them. I've just sort of tried to have a look on the notice board and around all the different groups that we're in and try and see how people do some things and just try and copy them at first. It's really nothing wrong with just trying to copy the really cool stuff you see. It's going to help you get an idea of how they do it, which is going to help you develop your own style. One thing I started doing was just started using the big infinite pillars. They look really interesting once you've got all three pieces, and I worked out if we do multiple levels of them, it gives a nice depth to a castle. So, you know, some shorter ones at front and some longer ones at the back. And there are also those battlement pieces that you can use as a border along the fronts of straight parts as well, or to just increase the diameter of the circle of the actual tower. And then as well, I figured to make it interesting, I tried to sort of think how we're going to use this pyramid shape. It's not very castle-like, so I decided to just cut that middle part out and make it like a big entranceway, trying to sort of think about what you imagine a castle to have. And you know, it has that front part often where a king or a queen will come out and talk to their subjects. So I figured we could have like a entrance out there, and because this is obviously a mini castle, we don't need to worry about having that huge balcony that I'm dreaming of, because just having that small balcony and the big doors still gives that same effect. And again, we're trying to follow along with that theme of the story island, so I figured the castle should have a lot of those flowers and medicinal bushes that you see around in Moonbrook. So I think a good idea if you're trying to do something that's got a lot of foliage in decoration is don't be scared to go over the top and then start chipping it away. I start putting in a lot more bushes and flowers probably that I'm going to keep, but that way I can chip it away and slowly see what looks nice. And I mean, look, you build it up as you go, but I think more the answer is feel free to build it up more than you think is necessary and then chip it away again, and you can sort of get a little bit more of a nice varied effect that way. And so the first thing I do try doing is a cool little pathway with flowers underneath, and the idea was to have a glass floor over it, but because I wasn't really thinking when I was planning, it didn't work out. I needed to have the flowers one level lower, obviously, for it not to be a disaster. But you live and you learn. So I could have just gone and dug it out another level, but I thought, hey, we can do that in another time in another way. I've got a similar floor in my Mediterranean build, so once I've gotten rid of those flower seeds that I'd only picked up, I decided we'd try a few different things. At first I tried water, and that was a nice effect, but again I realised as I was doing it, like the flowers, I would need to go a second level down to actually be able to see the water. But in the end, just glass over the gold ended up being enough. It can be quite frustrating trying to get the doing things like this, trying to get one block behind a block, and when you're rushing you end up taking out the wrong thing. And then so after that it was just putting around a lot of flowers in a sort of nice sporadic pattern, just to highlight that entranceway coming in. Again, not just with a seam, but with anything, you want to draw the person's eye to the places you want. So we want to use those flowers to make sure that people are looking up at the door, up at those banners, and up at that nice big entranceway above it. So that will be pretty much it for this one as well. So that is all three. I plan to keep building. I would really love if you guys done your own. I'd really just love to do it as a community event so that we can all share and see each other's styles and, learn a bit more about building. If you want to come over to the island, the link is in the ID and sort of everywhere. I've got a bunch of stuff set up, but not everything yet. If there's any stuff that you'd want me to add that you think would be helpful, just let me know. As well, if there's any builds that you want help with, just let me know and I can come have a look, or you can just send me photos. But I'll be posting more videos soon and a bunch of photos on Twitter. Plus, if you want me to just have a look around, I'm doing these sort of tourist tweets and they're really fun. So I'd be happy to do one of those on anyone's island as well. All right, I'll see you guys soon.